Hello and welcome to this tutorial on the topic of using Gluware config drift in audit. This time the focus will be on the audit functionality. So again, if you are taking the Gluware test drive, you will be able to follow along with pretty much all the steps that I show in this session. So we are going to go over how to import and export audit policies, what an audit policy consists of with required and forbidden components, how to understand and build those rules, how to run the audit, and how to build an audit from scratch. So let's jump into Gluware and get started. I click sign in, and Gluware will take me to the last app that I was in when I signed out or timed out in my last session, and I am in the config drift and audit app. So what I'm on here in the config drift and audit app is the device view. And what you're going to do when you get started with audit is switch over to the audit policy view. So you can either do that up here on the clipboard, and you'll see the clipboard then toggles to the a device icon, and I can toggle the views here, or if you've exposed them on the bar on the bottom of your page, and you can do that by expanding your toolbar and ensuring you have your icons showing, not hidden. You can do that from the bottom as well. So again, you're switching between this device view and you're switching to the policy view. So what we're going to talk about here is the fact that there are policies loaded. So in the test drive, your policies will be preloaded. If you're using a new Gluware system, you're going to want to probably start with some example policies, but also it's very quick and quite easy to build your own, and we're going to get into that. But I do want to give you a little bit of pointer to where you can go and grab some of the example audit policies Gluware has created for, as you can see here, the NIST, CIS examples, or DODSTIG. So if you go to gluware.com/community and navigate to the community page, if you are a user or a beta user or whatever your status is with Gluware, you can request access to the community page, and then you navigate back to the Gluware main page and click into the knowledge base. And in the knowledge base, there are example features and audits. And so you can see here, there are a number of example audits, and one of the audits missing from my system is this NIST CIS iOS 16 benchmark. If I click on it, it's going to show me a PDF that describes what the specification is all about, and then I can download a JSON file from the web page. So JSON is the format that we store our audits in. So if I jump back into the Gluware system here, again, I can see I have 4 audit policies already in the system, but I'm going to start with importing a policy, and I can choose the file, or if I have the file open on my computer in terms of I can view the file, I can just drag and drop it onto the system. And so that's what I'm going to do. I have my JSON file. I'm going to drag it over here and drop it. It just imported. Everything was good, and I click OK. And now I can see I have another audit policy. So pretty quick, knocking out the fact that you can very easily import new policies in JSON-based format into your system. And similarly, if you're working on an audit and you make a bunch of changes and you make it your own, or you make a company-specific audit or security-specific audit, you can export that audit out in JSON format and share it with those that you want to. So that's import and export. So let's jump into an audit and take a look at what it's made up of. So you double click on the audit itself, and it's going to open up in the audit viewer on top. And so you're going to want more real estate for that audit viewer. So I generally, bring my divider here pretty far down to see as much of the audit as I can. So from a component standpoint, a new audit or an audit is going to require a name, and then it has an optional description. So those two components, and then you get into policy rules. And so what you're going to see here are each one of these boxes as I scroll down is an individual rule. So an audit policy is made up of rules. In general, you're either saying a command, a configuration statement is required, or a configuration statement is forbidden. So at a high level, that's what a rule is, and you literally can copy and paste CLI right into here. It's CLI with regex. So you're going to see some characters you may not be familiar with. This caret symbol in regex is the beginning of a string. You don't necessarily have to put the caret in when, something like AAA may start right at, the first line. But for good hygiene and whatnot, a lot of times that you're going to see that in there if it's not the leftmost column when you kind of look at a config file. The left side of this, you're going to have the individual rule name and the individual rule description. I believe the name is required. I don't think the description is required. Then you're going to want to assign a filter and assign it to an operating system, because whatever CLI you're building is going to be, CLI from a given iOS family. So when you click the drop down here, you'll see all the operating systems Gluware supports. Basically, when you're building it, just make sure you're assigning the proper operating system, and then Gluware will only apply rules to devices with the matching operating system. Concept item, if you've watched other videos in this series or as we get into config modeling, you're going to learn more about what concept items are. But essentially, you could use a concept item to focus in on a part of a configuration where Gluware knows how to look at a very specific part of the configuration instead of scanning the entire configuration for that particular rule. Because, it just depends if you want dependency on that the concept items or not. You're going to see a lot of rules in our examples not leveraging concept items, but there are some examples where we do. And it can help the audit to run more efficiently. And then scope is another way of filtering or telling the engine where to look in the configuration. And so this often is used on sections or segments of configs that repeat. So you can put a scope in regex to look at each one of the Ethernet interfaces configured, or each one of the aux lines, or there's various purposes and reasons why you would want to call out or leverage a scope, and we'll see some of that. So let's just take a look at this audit and just understand it a little bit. It requires AAA from a authentication mechanism, so that enables AAA. It requires turning on AAA authentication, so another config statement related to AAA, and again, AAA authentication enable default. So what you're seeing here are each one of the rules called out in the specification and how it can be defined in specific CLI configs that will meet that rule name. This is on the console line. So on the console line is requiring authentication, and you can see here where scope is used, where it's calling out the console port as line con as the scope, and wants to ensure under the scope of the console lines that login authentication command is there. Same on the VTY. So this is starting with anything with TTY, it's going to look for login authentication. Same word for VTY, right? So just going through this a little bit faster. Turning on HTTP secure server. So this is versus just the unsecured HTTP server, and turning on HTTP authentication. So you can see that one of the keys I would suggest you do kind of in terms of looking at these example audits is start to observe how regex is used, because we can all think of examples where a VLAN ID or a password or some string or some variable is going to be inside the command, and maybe we're looking for a specific value, or maybe we accept a range, and you want to understand how you can use regex to build out your rules. So I wanted to get down here and see if there were forbiddens in this. I don't happen to know all these rules by heart. You're going to start to see common syntax of regex, like for example, and just for the fun of it, I did an older presentation when we introduced we have a full-blown regex utility built into config modeling, and just a quick kind of cheat sheet on a dot is the start of any character, a slash lowercase s is a space, a slash capital S is a character non-space. So you have these like identifiers, and then when they're followed by a plus, that's saying there's a one or more there. So you often see a dot plus or a slash capital S plus, meaning there is a, like if I was looking for, you know, this phrase space, it's a slash start of a string, and then if I have a plus, it's a string, and then since these are non-spaces, as soon as I get to the end here, this would end that regex. So just some examples, and I think it's very useful. You know, Gluware doesn't require programming per se, but it is very helpful to ramp up on regex because it's used in quite a few places to deal with the variables and things in config files. So I think we've kind of, you know, gone pretty far in terms of looking at the specification. So what I'd like to do now is get to the point where let's run it. So when you go to run an audit, what you want to do is navigate back to your device view, and I'm going to kind of hand select. I'm going to do a shift and click and select these iOS XE devices here. And so I've selected these devices, and I'm gonna click on this icon here, which is Audit the Configuration. So I click Audit. So it has, you know, default label for this audit, and then I've done similarly to when we did config drift. I've done a manual selection. Applying a filter again is very powerful because any additional nodes that or devices that you add later that match that filter will get picked up when you run subsequent audits or drifts. So it's quite useful in production environments where you are adding equipment that you do want to kind of add into the drift or add into the audit. If you used a filter, they get automatically added in. Now, the other thing to think about is what config file are we auditing? So the default is to use the last capture that drift did. So then it will run very fast because it's running from those captured configurations that are already in memory. So if you've already recently done a drift, which we've done in this example, in this context, I'm good to go with that. Otherwise, I can tick this box to capture a new snapshot, and capturing a new snapshot will add time because we'll go out and grab all those config files and then we'll run the audit. So keep in mind this will, you know, audit what is, you know, running on the network right now. But if you do have a recent snapshot and there hasn't been drift, then you can audit what's already been captured, and then you're going to want to select the policy that you want to audit. So in this case, I'm going to run the policy we're looking at, this NIST CIS on Cisco iOS 16 benchmark, and I can schedule it or I can start it. Let's go ahead and run it. So there are you know, the metrics, usually these audits run fast, which this did, but there are a lot of rules in that particular audit. So the more rules you have, the more configs you run on will affect the runtime. And so I can see everything ran fine, but there were 278 violations. So that's a lot. So let's click into View Results and hit discard because I don't want to change anything in the audit. So now it's showing me each of my devices and the failures that I have. So at least I can say this: I have good consistency. I have the exact, because there's pretty consistent configurations. I have the same amount of violations on each device, and I can expand each device and see exactly which rules I've broken. So it's going to tell me the block. Again, is it looking at the full config or some specific part of the config? The rule name, this is just taken right out of the name. Whoops, right out of the name that, and then the violation. So I didn't have SNMP, it didn't have, you know, banner exec, I didn't have AAA. So you can see all of the violations I had, and clearly, you know, these devices here in this test lab were not configured yet to really meet the stringent requirements of this audit. So there's obviously a lot of failures. So, but it's a really good, you know, example to go through, and to go through, you know, really robust audit, and to be aware of some of the specifications out there that you can audit based on. So there we, you know, this kind of concludes the portion of, you know, import and export as well as running an audit. In this next part, we're going to think about or look at how do we build an audit from scratch. So before we go and build the audit, let's just double check on a few of the parameters or views I don't think I covered yet up on this top right. Here you can go back to the view of the audit itself. This is the Audit Editor, where you can view what's been configured and also you can edit and save. Let's go to this view, which is a summary of everything that's been run. This is quite a useful view because it's here you get that one-liner summary and you can go back in to navigate everything associated with that audit from the audit policy itself. You can float over and see what these icons are. This is all the logs. Here we have all the devices that were part of that audit. There are your detailed results, and you can run the audit again from here. So a couple quick links, but really it's trying to put everything in context to what all was run in this audit. Because when you are running, and if you have violations and you're working towards eliminating violations, you're going to rerun and make sure you're in a good state. So let's get to building an audit from scratch. So what we're going to do is navigate back to my audit view here, and I can close this top dialog, and I can say discard. I don't want to change anything. Oops, save. Okay, so now I'm in my audit view. Now I can click Add Policy. So I'm just going to call this, Company Policy, and hit Create. So Company Policy, just call it Company Standard Router Config. Something really, really simple. And I'm going to hit click Add New Rule. So one of the things that's very actually handy here is that you can navigate back to your Device Explorer, and let's again pick on Spoke 1, or using it in another example. Let me double click on Spoke 1, and it's going to open up another tab, and I just want to go to the view of the config. So now I have the whole config file of Spoke 1. And let's just say I like config 1 and I want to make it my standard. So let's do some really basic things. So Control C. I'm going to require a host name. So this rule is called host name, and after host name it's going to have a string that's non-spaces, and the description I don't need to add, and this is, I can hit I, and this is iOS XE, and I don't need to configure anything else. So I just built a rule for host name. Now if I go back to Spoke 1, I can come in here. Let's just take a look at, let's say I want to make sure name server is configured. Control C. So I can literally copy and paste right out of, so I need to add a rule. Go down to required name server, and I'm going to do a dot plus as long as the name server is configured. This is called name server, and it is on iOS XE. You get the picture here. So you can start to just go down and ensure that the components that you want or require are here. There's certain, I was just thinking about, there's certain vulnerabilities that are known that where you could lock things down. But again, let's just say you require, again, I'm going to do simpler things here than, let's say I require IP HTTP secure server. So actually this is a set all related to the HTTP services. So let's do it this way. I'm going to Control C, go back to company policy, add new rule, and I can put them all in, and I can say all of these statements are required. What this does is it flags it instead of individual, because what you don't want is, let's say you need all three of these to be compliant or within your specification. You don't necessarily want to have to build out three individual rules. It's a block all related to the same thing. HTTP server policy, and again iOS, and okay. So and similarly, I can specify statements that are forbidden. So now I've built this policy. Let's just say I'm all happy with it. I hit save. So it's my company policy. Now again, I want to run it. So I'm going to go back to, I'm in my node view here. So select this group of iOS XE devices, similar like I did before. I click run the audit, or audit the configuration. I'm going to do the selection again. This time I'm going to do company policy and hit start. Should be run really quick this time. And then, so I did have 6 violations. So I view results, and we're going to see what happened here. Even spoke 1, I had something fail here. So something related to the way I configured host name was not matching my my policy here. So I'm going to have to go fix that, and that's probably, so all of these picked up that host name. So I got to go and fix, I would have to go and fix that. So let me try to do that. Company policy, let me edit the policy. Host name. I'm going to add the caret in the front of it, and I'm gonna use, instead of, I use dot plus, because the host name is going to be followed by that. And just let me double check my syntax here. And this is where the fun of these things come out, in that, host name, and then there's a space, and then there's a string. Host name, save, and let's just rerun this. Make sure whatever, if I had a syntax problem, it's been addressed. And hit view results. So no violations. So you can see here, sometimes you got to play around with the regex and just ensure your it's meeting what you require. So that concludes the tutorial on the audit component. Hopefully you see a lot of value and to be able to just leverage a lot of example audits, as well as very quickly being able to build your own, kind of copy paste right from your configurations, a little bit of regex, and you're building audit policies. So that concludes the session. Thank you very much.